The dust storm rolled through Petaluma, California like a biblical curse, turning the sky the color of old blood and choking the life from everything Zachary Ingram had spent 15 years building. He stood in what used to be his cattle pasture, watching the last of his herd stumble toward the dried creek bed that had not seen water in 8 months. The year was 1876, and the drought had transformed the rolling California hills into a cracked wasteland. His boots sank into powder where grass should have grown thick and green. The wind carried grit that stung his eyes and settled in the creases of his weathered face. He was 32 years old and felt ancient. The cattle were skeletal now, ribs showing through hide that hung loose like poorly fitted clothes. Zachary had already sold most of them at a loss, prices plummeting as every rancher in the county tried to offload stock they could not feed or water. The bank had sent another letter last week. He had not opened it. He knew what it said. Behind him, the ranch house stood silent. His wife Sarah had died 3 winters ago from pneumonia, and since then the place had felt more like a tomb than a home. They had never been blessed with children, a sorrow that had hollowed out Sarah's eyes in her final years. Now Zachary was alone with his failing ranch and a future that looked as barren as the land around him. He walked back toward the house, each step raising a small cloud of dust. The barn doors hung crooked on their hinges. Inside, his 2 remaining horses stood with heads low, rationing their energy. He had been feeding them what little hay he could buy, but that money was nearly gone too. Everything was nearly gone. The kitchen table held the evidence of his ruin. Bills stacked high, ledgers showing numbers that went from black to red to desperate. He had borrowed against the land, then borrowed more when the first loan came due. The bank in town had been patient at first, but patience wore thin when money was involved. They would foreclose within the month. Zachary Ingram, who had built this ranch from nothing, who had broken his back clearing stones and building fences, would lose it all to a sky that refused to rain. He poured himself whiskey from a bottle that was also nearly empty and sat in the gathering darkness, not bothering to light a lamp. The wind howled around the house, finding every gap and crack, filling the rooms with its mournful voice. Tomorrow he would ride into town and see if there was any work to be had. Ranch work was scarce when every ranch was dying, but maybe the general store needed someone. Maybe he could shoe horses or mend tack. Maybe he could swallow enough pride to survive. Sleep came fitfully that night, full of dreams where water poured from the sky but turned to sand before it hit the ground. He woke before dawn, made coffee from grounds he had already used twice, and rode into Petaluma on his mare, a sturdy bay named Rosie who had seen better days but still had heart. The town was quiet in the early morning light, dust laying thick on the wooden sidewalks. Petaluma had grown up around cattle, ranching, and farming, and now it was slowly starving along with the land. Half the businesses had closed, windows dark and empty. The saloon was always open, though, full of men drinking away their troubles or their last dollars. Zachary tied Rosie outside the general store and stepped inside. The proprietor, a barrel-chested man named Hiram, looked up from his counter and shook his head before Zachary could even speak. "Got nothing, Zach. Sorry. 3 men already asked this week. Anything at all. I can haul freight, repair work, anything. Nobody's got money to pay for work that needs doing. You know how it is." Hiram's face was genuinely sympathetic. "This drought's killing us all." Zachary nodded and left. He tried the blacksmith next, then the hotel, then the livery. Same answer everywhere. By noon he found himself standing outside the bank, staring at the wooden door like it was the entrance to hell. Inside, the clerk directed him to the manager's office. Edmund Turnbull sat behind a massive desk, his suit crisp despite the heat, his face set in an expression of practiced regret. "Mr. Ingram, I wondered when you would come in. I need more time. I cannot extend the loan again. We have been more than generous. Just until the rains come. Once the rains come, I can rebuild. The rains may not come for another year, or longer. We cannot operate on hope." Turnbull steepled his fingers. "I am sorry, truly, but the bank must protect its interests. We will need to take possession of the property at the end of this month." Zachary felt something break inside him, a foundation giving way. "That land is my life. The land is collateral, Mr. Ingram. You signed papers agreeing to these terms." There was nothing more to say. Zachary walked out of the bank into the blazing afternoon sun, feeling like a ghost. He had lived through the war, fought at Gettysburg and survived, come west to build something lasting, and now it was ending with a banker's signature on a piece of paper. He retrieved Rosie and rode slowly down the main street. Near the edge of town, he passed a small house with a well-tended vegetable garden that somehow remained green despite the drought. A woman was working in the garden, her dress simple but clean, her dark hair pulled back under a bonnet. She stood as he passed, one hand shading her eyes, and their gazes met for a moment. She looked to be in her late 20s, with a face that was striking rather than pretty, strong features and direct eyes. Something in her expression held both sorrow and strength. Zachary touched his hat brim in greeting, and she nodded back before returning to her work. He had seen her before in town, but did not know her name. Petaluma was small enough that most faces were familiar, but large enough that not everyone knew everyone's story. She lived alone in that little house, he thought, which probably meant she was a widow. The war and the harsh land had made many widows. Back at his ranch, Zachary went through his possessions with a practical eye. What could be sold? The furniture was modest, would fetch little. His tack and saddles were good quality, might bring in a few dollars. His rifles were valuable, but he would need at least one. He had already sold Sarah's jewelry, what little there had been, to pay for her medicine in those final months. The next days passed in a haze of grim tasks. He sold what he could, paid what debts he could pay, and watched the calendar march toward the end of the month. The cattle were gone, the hay gone, the money gone. He kept Rosie and one other horse, a young gelding named Scout, and his favorite rifle. Everything else went to pay creditors who looked at him with pity or satisfaction depending on their nature. On his last night in the house, Zachary sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The air was cooler after dark but still dry, sucking moisture from everything. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called. He thought about Sarah, wondered what she would say if she could see him now. She had been practical, unsentimental about most things. She would probably tell him to stop feeling sorry for himself and figure out what came next. But what did come next? He was 32 with no land, no herd, barely any money, and no prospects. He could try to find ranch work in another county, somewhere the drought had not hit as hard. He could go back east, though the thought of admitting defeat to the few relatives he had left made his stomach turn. He could stay in Petaluma and scrape by on odd jobs until something changed. The sun rose on his last morning as a landowner. He packed his bedroll and saddlebags, loaded his few remaining possessions onto Scout, and rode Rosie away from the ranch without looking back. Looking back would break what little resolve he had left. In town, he rented a room above the saloon, a cramped space with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the street. It cost 50 cents a week, which meant his remaining money would last about 2 months if he was careful. He stabled the horses at the livery, where the owner let him work off part of their feed cost by mucking stalls and mending fence. It was hard, anonymous work. the kind that used his body but not his mind, leaving too much room for bitter thoughts. He worked dawn to dusk and fell into bed exhausted, and still sleep was elusive. At night he could hear the sounds from the saloon below, laughter and piano music and sometimes fighting, the noise of people trying to forget their troubles. During his third week in town, Zachary was hauling water for the livery when he saw the woman from the green garden again. She was at the general store, haggling with Hiram over the price of flour. Her voice was low but firm, not backing down even when Hiram protested his own costs. Finally they settled on a price, and she counted out coins from a small purse, her movements precise. As she left, Zachary held the door for her. Up close he could see she was probably 28 or 29, with hazel eyes and sun-weathered skin. She carried herself with the bearing of someone who had worked hard all her life and expected to keep working. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying a hint of southern accent. "Madam," he replied, and she passed by with her parcels. That evening at the saloon he asked the bartender about her. "That would be Rosalind Burke," the bartender said, pouring whiskey for another customer. "Widow. Been here about 4 years. Her husband died in a logging accident up north, and she came here with a little insurance money, bought that house, and has been keeping to herself mostly. Good woman from what I hear. Pays her debts, does not cause trouble. She has the only green garden I have seen in months. She is careful with water, has a deep well and uses every drop smart, sells vegetables when she has extra, not much extra these days though." Zachary nursed his beer and thought about that garden, about the discipline it must take to keep anything alive in this drought. It spoke of someone who did not give up easy. The next Sunday he saw her at church. He had not been attending regularly since Sarah died, but something drew him that morning. The small wooden church was half empty, many families having left the area or lost their faith along with their livelihoods. Rosalind sat 3 rows ahead, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The preacher spoke about job and suffering and God's mysterious purposes, and Zachary found himself watching the back of her head instead of listening. After the service, people lingered outside in the shade, exchanging news and gossip. Zachary stood awkwardly to one side, no longer quite fitting in as a ranch owner but not yet comfortable as whatever he was now. Rosalind emerged and paused on the church steps, looking out over the dusty town. On impulse, Zachary approached her. "Mrs. Burke, I am Zachary Ingram." She turned, studying him with those direct hazel eyes. "I know who you are. You lost your ranch." There was no judgment in her voice, just fact. He appreciated that. "Yes, madam, I did. I am sorry. I know that is hard. I saw your garden. It looks good." A small smile touched her lips. "I work at it. Water is the challenge, but if you are patient and careful, things will grow. Seems like you are about the only one in the county managing it. I do not have cattle to water, just a garden and 2 chickens. It makes a difference." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Rosalind said, "Are you finding work?" "Some. At the livery mostly, enough to get by." "Can you repair fences? I have some that need mending and I cannot pay much, but I could feed you lunch." It was a simple offer, practical, but Zachary felt something ease in his chest. "I can do that." "When do you need it done?" "Tomorrow, if you are free." Tomorrow would be fine. She nodded, satisfied, and gave him directions to her house, though he already knew where it was. Then she walked away, carrying her Bible and her dignity, and Zachary watched her go with a feeling he could not quite name. The next day he rode out to her place mid-morning, tools strapped to his saddle. The house was small but well-maintained, white paint that had been refreshed not long ago, shutters that hung straight. The garden took up most of the side yard, neat rows of vegetables protected from the worst of the sun by a canvas awning she had rigged up. The fence that needed mending was around a small pasture behind the house. Rosalind came out when she heard his horse. She had changed into work clothes, a simple dress with an apron over it, her sleeves rolled up. "Thank you for coming. Happy to have the work." She showed him the fence sections that needed attention. Several posts had rotted at the base and needed replacing. Rails were loose or split. It was a solid day's work, maybe two. He set to it while she returned to the house, and soon he was absorbed in the familiar rhythm of digging and hammering and measuring. Around noon, she called him in for lunch. He washed up at the pump in the yard and entered the house hesitantly. It was dim inside after the bright sun, cool and clean. The furniture was simple but comfortable. The table was set for two with plain dishes. "Sit," she said, and brought out soup and fresh bread. The soup was vegetable, rich with flavor, and the bread was still warm. After weeks of saloon food and his own poor cooking, it tasted like a feast. "This is very good," he said. "Thank you. It is not much. It is plenty." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Rosalind said, "The bartender told me you were at Gettysburg." "I was, long time ago now. My husband was at Shiloh. He did not talk about it much. Not much to say about it that is worth saying." She nodded, understanding. "Did you lose family in the war? A brother, Chancellorsville, you, a cousin?" "And my father afterward, but that was illness more than the war, though I think the war broke something in him." She broke off a piece of bread, her movements neat and controlled. "My husband and I married after the war and came west to start over. We thought we would get away from death and loss. Then he fell from a tree and broke his neck, and I learned that death does not care what you leave behind. I am sorry. It was 4 years ago. I have adjusted." She looked at him directly. "But you understand, you lost your wife, 3 years ago, pneumonia, and now your ranch." "Yes." "What will you do?" It was the question he had been avoiding. He set down his spoon and considered. "I do not know. Find work somewhere, maybe leave Petaluma." "Do you want to leave?" "No, but wanting and having are two different things lately." Rosalind smiled, a real smile this time that reached her eyes. "That is the truth. I wanted a husband and a family and a long life together. I got 4 years and a patch of California dirt, but the dirt is mine and I am still here, so I work with what I have." There was something bracing about her honesty, her refusal to wallow. Zachary felt the weight on his chest lighten slightly. "That is a good way to look at it. It is the only way that keeps you moving forward." She stood and cleared the dishes. "There is more work after lunch if you want it. I can pay you $3 for the whole job, and dinner as well if you come back tomorrow." "That is fair." He went back to the fence, and she went back to her garden. As he worked, he found himself aware of her presence in the yard, the quiet competence with which she moved through her tasks. She weeded with steady patience, watered with careful measure, picked vegetables with discerning hands. She had built a life here alone, and she was maintaining it through sheer will and discipline. By evening, the fence was half done. He packed up his tools and she came over to inspect his work, nodding approval. "Good, solid. Tomorrow then, tomorrow." He rode back to town as the sun set, painting the dusty sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in weeks, he felt something other than despair. It was not quite hope, but it was not nothing either. The next day he returned and finished the fence by mid-afternoon. Rosalind made dinner, a chicken stew with vegetables from her garden and dumplings that melted in his mouth. They ate at the table again, and this time the conversation came easier. "How do you keep your well from going dry?" he asked. "It is deep, which helps, and I am very careful. I catch what little rain we get, even the dew some mornings. Every drop counts. You are resourceful." "I have to be. There is no one else to depend on. No family back in Georgia, but we are not close. My parents are gone and my siblings have their own struggles. I write once a year at Christmas. That is enough. It must be lonely. She considered this. Sometimes. But lonely is better than some alternatives I have seen. There are women in town married to men who make them miserable. At least I am free to live as I choose. That is worth something. It is worth everything. She poured coffee strong and hot. What about you? Any family? A sister in Pennsylvania. We do not correspond much. After Sarah died, I just focused on the ranch. It was all I had. And now I need to figure out what to have next. Rosalind looked at him across the table, her gaze searching. You strike me as a man who knows how to work. That is a valuable thing, drought or no drought. Men who know how to work always find their way. I hope you are right. I am usually right. She smiled to soften the boast. Finish your coffee and I will pay you before you go. He finished the coffee, which was excellent, and she counted out $3 silver into his hand. Her fingers were calloused, warm from holding her cup. The touch lasted only a moment, but he found himself aware of it. Thank you for the work, he said. Thank you for doing it well. If you need other jobs, I usually know who is looking. People tell me things. I appreciate that. He rode back to town slowly, the silver coins heavy in his pocket. $3 was not much, but it was earned honestly, and the meals had been worth as much as the money. More than that, though, was the feeling of being useful again, of building instead of watching things fall apart. Over the following weeks, Rosalind did indeed steer work his way. She mentioned him to neighbors who needed repairs. She told the widow Peterson he was good with horses when her mare needed shoeing. Small jobs, but they added up. Zachary found himself stopping by her house every few days, sometimes with a legitimate reason and sometimes with flimsier excuses. She never seemed to mind. They would sit in her kitchen or on her porch in the evening coolness and talk about everything and nothing. She told him about Georgia, about growing up poor and learning to make do. He told her about the war, more than he had talked about it in years, finding that she listened without judgment or false sympathy. She had seen enough hardship to understand that some things left scars that never quite healed. I killed a boy at Gettysburg, he said one evening, the words coming out of nowhere. Could not have been more than 16. He came running at me and I shot him and he fell and called for his mother while he died. I dream about him still sometimes. Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My husband fell 30 feet. It took him 2 days to die. He was in terrible pain and there was nothing anyone could do. At the end he begged me to kill him, to end it, and I could not. I held his hand and told him I loved him and let him suffer because I was too weak to do what he needed. I dream about that. They sat in silence, two people who had survived terrible things, finding strange comfort in shared darkness. Does it ever stop hurting? Zachary asked. It stops being sharp. It becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. At least that is how it has been for me. I am not there yet. You will get there. You are stronger than you think. He looked at her, this woman who kept a green garden in a drought, who faced each day with practical courage. So are you. Something shifted between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. They both felt it and both drew back slightly, uncertain and wary. It was too soon, too much. They returned to safer topics and Zachary left before full dark, but something had changed. The summer dragged on, merciless and dry. Petaluma continued to struggle. More families left, abandoning homes and businesses. The bank foreclosed on 3 more properties. Violence broke out occasionally. Men pushed past their limits by heat and loss. The sheriff, an aging man named Collins, did his best to keep order, but there was a feeling of barely controlled chaos. Through it all, Zachary and Rosalind drew closer. It happened gradually, naturally, like water finding its level. He repaired her roof when shingles came loose. She mended his shirts when buttons fell off. He brought her news from town. She fed him dinner more nights than not, and he stopped pretending there was a good reason beyond wanting to see her. One evening in late August, after a meal of beans and cornbread, they sat on her porch watching the sun set. The heat was finally breaking, though no rain had come. A slight breeze made the evening almost pleasant. "I have been thinking," Rosalind said, "about what I am doing here." "What do you mean? This house, this garden? I am surviving, but that is all, just surviving. I thought that was enough, but lately I am not sure. What else do you want?" She was quiet for a long moment. Companionship. Someone to talk to. Someone to share the work and the meals and the evenings. "I thought I was content alone, but I am starting to realize I was just telling myself that because alone was all I had." Zachary's heart was beating faster. "You are not alone now." "No." She turned to look at him, her face serious. "No, I am not. You have been here almost every day for 2 months. People in town are talking. Let them talk. It does not bother you, should it? It might hurt your reputation, spending so much time with a widow." "I lost my ranch, Rosalind. My reputation is not high on my list of concerns," she smiled, "always practical." "I learned from the best." They lapsed into comfortable silence. Then Zachary said, "I have been thinking too, about what comes next for me. I do not want to leave Petaluma. I thought I might have to, but I do not want to anymore." "What changed, you?" The word hung in the air between them. Rosalind looked down at her hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "Zachary, I need you to be clear. I am not a young girl who can afford to misunderstand." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that these past weeks have meant something to me, that seeing you has become the best part of my days, that when I think about the future now, you are in it." He paused, then pushed on. "I am saying I have feelings for you, and I hope you might have feelings for me too." Rosalind was very still. Then she reached over and took his hand, her calloused palm against his. "I do have feelings for you. I have been trying not to because I was afraid of losing someone again. Afraid of being hurt again. But feelings do not care what we are afraid of. No, they do not." "Where does this go, Zachary? You have nothing, I have almost nothing. We are 2 people barely scraping by. I know, but we could scrape by together. That has to be better than scraping by alone." She laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound he had heard in years. "That is the least romantic proposal I have ever heard." "Is that what that was? I thought I was just stating facts. You are terrible at this. Completely terrible, but I mean it. Every word." Rosalind squeezed his hand. "I know you do. That is why I am saying yes." They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands like young people, though they were both old enough to know better and wise enough not to care. The future was still uncertain, the drought unbroken, their resources meager. But the crushing loneliness that had defined both their lives had lifted, and that was wealth beyond counting. The next weeks were strange and wonderful. They told no one at first, wanting to keep the fragile new thing between them private. But in a town like Petaluma, privacy was an illusion. Soon enough people noticed that Zachary was spending every evening at the Burke house, that they walked together to church on Sunday, that they looked at each other with poorly concealed affection. The reactions were mixed. Some people were happy for them, 2 lonely people finding comfort. Others were scandalized, thinking it was too soon, too fast, improper. The busybodies clucked their tongues and predicted disaster. Zachary and Rosalind ignored them all. In September, Zachary moved out of his room above the saloon and into Rosalind's house. They married at the church on a Sunday afternoon with just a handful of people present. Rosalind wore a simple blue dress she had made herself. Zachary wore his best shirt and his one good suit that had seen better days. The preacher said the words and they repeated their vows. And when Zachary kissed his new wife, it felt like the first good thing that had happened in years. There was no honeymoon, no celebration beyond a dinner at the hotel restaurant that they could barely afford. But walking back to the house together as husband and wife, Zachary felt rich beyond measure. That night, in the small bedroom, they came together with a mixture of tenderness and passion that surprised them both. It had been years since either had been intimate with anyone. They were awkward at first, nervous, but they laughed at their nervousness, and that broke the tension. Rosalind was bold in her wants, unashamed of her body and his, and Zachary found himself responding to her openness with his own. They made love twice, slowly and then with more urgency, and afterward lay tangled together in the narrow bed, sweating in the heat. "I forgot it could be like this," Rosalind said, her head on his chest. "So did I. James was a good man, but he was not passionate. We were comfortable together, but never quite like this." Zachary stroked her hair. "Sarah and I grew apart toward the end. She blamed me for not giving her children. Maybe she was right to. You do not know that it was you. I do not know that it was not. Well, I am 30 years old and never had a child either. Maybe it is me, maybe it is neither of us, maybe it just is what it is. Would you want children if it happened?" She was quiet. "I had given up thinking about it. Now I do not know. Ask me again in a year." "Fair enough." They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds through the open window. Finally, Rosalind said, "Zachary, we need to talk about practical things. Now, if not now, when we are married, we need a plan." He sighed but knew she was right. "All right, what are you thinking?" "My house is small, but it is paid for. The land is just the half-acre, but it is enough for the garden and a few animals. You still have 2 horses. We both know how to work. If we are careful, we can survive." "Just survive, though, like you said before." "Yes, just survive. Unless we find a way to do more." "What did you have in mind?" "I have been saving money for 4 years. Not much, but some. I was thinking about buying sheep." "Sheep? They do better in drought than cattle. They can eat plants cattle will not touch. They need less water. And wool always has a market." Zachary considered this. "It is a good idea, but sheep have their own challenges, predators, disease, and we would need more land eventually if we wanted a real flock." "I know, but it is something, better than nothing. How much have you saved?" $200. He was genuinely surprised. "That is impressive. I have been very careful, and I sold some of my husband's tools and equipment. I have been waiting for the right opportunity." "Then let us think about it seriously. Research it. Maybe talk to the Reynolds family south of town. They run sheep." "Yes, that is what I was thinking." They talked late into the night, making plans, discussing possibilities. It felt good to be building toward something again, to have a partner in the struggle. When they finally slept, Zachary rested better than he had in months. The next morning they began their married life in earnest. They fell into a routine quickly. Zachary took any work he could find in town while Rosalind maintained the garden and the house. In the evenings they worked together, preserving vegetables, repairing equipment, planning for the future. Money was tight, but they had enough. Zachary visited the Reynolds family one afternoon in October. They ran about 50 sheep on their property south of town and seemed to be managing better than most. Thomas Reynolds was a tall, thin man in his 50s who had switched from cattle to sheep 5 years earlier. "Best decision I ever made," he said, walking Zachary through his pasture. "Sheep are smarter than people give them credit for. More work in some ways, especially during lambing, but they are hardy. The drought has hurt us, do not mistake me, but we are still operating. Most of the cattle ranches around here are dead or dying." "What is the initial investment to get started?" "Depends on how many head you want. You can get good breeding ewes for about $5 each right now. Rams are more, maybe 15 to 20 for a good one. You want at least 20 ewes to start if you are serious about it. That is your foundation. Zachary did the math in his head. So about $125 for the sheep, plus feed, plus equipment. Feed is not too bad if you have decent pasture. Shearing equipment you can rent or borrow at first. The real cost is land. You need space to rotate them, keep the pasture from getting overgrazed. We only have half an acre. Reynolds shook his head. That would not be enough. You would need at least 20 acres for a small flock. 50 would be better. I do not have that. Could you lease land? Some of the foreclosed properties are sitting empty. Bank might lease cheap just to have someone using it. That was an idea Zachary had not considered. Maybe. I will look into it. He rode home thoughtful. Rosalind was in the garden when he arrived, and he told her what he had learned. 20 acres, she said. That is a lot, but not impossible. No, not impossible. He paused. Rosalind, there is something I want to do. I want to go see my old ranch. Why? Because I need to see it. Need to see what happened to it. Maybe I can find out who bought it, whether they would lease some back to us. Do you think that is wise? It might hurt seeing it. It will hurt, but I need to do it anyway. She nodded, understanding. Then go. I will be here when you get back. The next morning he rode out to his old property. It was strange approaching it after 3 months away. The house looked smaller than he remembered, shabbier. The barn was leaning more. The pastures were utterly brown, cracked earth stretching in every direction. No cattle, no life. It looked abandoned. He dismounted and walked up to the house. The door was unlocked and he pushed it open. Inside, dust covered everything. His furniture was gone, sold, or taken. The rooms echoed with emptiness. He walked through slowly, remembering where things had been. The kitchen where Sarah had cooked. The bedroom where they had slept and argued and loved. The office where he had kept his books and tried to stay ahead of the debt. It was just a building now, nothing more. The life had gone out of it. Outside, he walked the fence lines. Everything was in disrepair, failing faster without anyone to maintain it. He walked to the top of the ridge that overlooked the property and sat on a rock, looking out over the land he had lost. It hurt, but not as much as he had feared. The sharp grief had dulled to a persistent ache. This place had been his dream, but the dream was dead. He had a new life now, small and uncertain but real. He could not go back, only forward. As he sat there, a rider approached. Zachary turned to see Edmund Turnbull, the bank manager, on a gray horse. Turnbull looked surprised to see him. "Mr. Ingram, I did not expect to find you here. Just visiting. Is that a problem?" "No, no. The property belongs to the bank now, but you are not trespassing exactly." Turnbull dismounted and joined him on the ridge. "I come out here sometimes to assess the properties we have taken possession of. It is depressing work." "I imagine so. For what it is worth, I truly was sorry about your situation. You were a good customer for many years. Water under the bridge now." They stood in awkward silence. Then Zachary said, "What is the bank planning to do with this place? Sell it eventually when the market recovers. If the market recovers. For now it just sits. We have 7 properties like this, all empty, all losing value. Would the bank consider leasing some of this land?" Turnbull looked at him with surprise. "To you? Yes, not the buildings, just pasture land, 20 or 30 acres. For what purpose? Sheep. My wife and I are thinking about starting a small flock." Turnbull was quiet, considering. The bank does not typically lease. "But these are unusual circumstances. How much would you pay?" "What seems fair? I do not know. Let me think about it." Turnbull pulled out a small notebook and made a note. "Come see me at the bank next week. We can discuss terms." "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I make no promises." But there was a hint of possibility now where before there had been only closure. Zachary rode home feeling cautiously hopeful. He told Rosalind about the conversation that evening. "If we could lease 20 acres at a reasonable rate," she said, "we could make this work. We have the money for the sheep. You know cattle, which is not the same as sheep but related. I can manage the books and the business side. We could actually do this. It is a risk. Everything is a risk, but at least it is a risk we choose, not one forced on us." The following week, Zachary went to the bank. Turnbull met with him in his office, more informal than their previous meetings. "I spoke with the board," Turnbull said. "They agreed to a lease arrangement, 25 acres of pasture on your former property, $50 a year, paid quarterly. 1-year term with option to renew. If you improve the property, maintain the fences and such, we will credit $25 against the lease." Zachary did the math. $12.50 per quarter was manageable. And if they maintained the property, it was really only $25 for the year. That is very fair. It benefits the bank to have someone using the land rather than letting it go completely fallow. And frankly, Mr. Ingram, I feel some responsibility for your situation. This does not make it right, but perhaps it helps. It helps considerably. Thank you. They drew up papers and Zachary signed, feeling strange putting his name to a lease for land that had once been his. But Rosalind was right, this was a choice, something he was building rather than losing. He rode home and told Rosalind. She whooped with joy, rare, unbridled emotion from his usually controlled wife, and kissed him hard. "We are really doing this," she said. "We are really doing this." They spent the next week making plans and preparations. Zachary went back to the Reynolds family and arranged to buy 20 ewes and 1 ram, all good stock. Thomas Reynolds gave him advice on care and management, and his wife Martha gave Rosalind tips on everything from birthing to wool processing. "The first year will be the hardest," Martha said. "Sheep are not hard animals, but they need attention. You will be learning as you go, and you will make mistakes. Everyone does. Just do not give up when things go wrong, because they will go wrong." "We are used to things going wrong," Rosalind said. "Then you will do fine." In late October, they brought the sheep to their leased land. Zachary had spent 2 weeks repairing fences and clearing one of the old watering troughs. The sheep settled in quickly, grazing on what sparse vegetation remained. It was not much yet, but it was a start. Zachary and Rosalind fell into a new routine. Early mornings they checked the sheep, made sure none had wandered or gotten into trouble. Mid-morning, Rosalind worked her garden while Zachary took odd jobs in town when available. Afternoons they worked together on projects improving the shelter for the sheep, storing winter feed, reinforcing fences. Evenings were for meals and quiet time together. The work was hard and the progress slow, but it was their work, their progress. They were building something together. That made all the difference. As winter approached, the drought finally broke. In early November, clouds rolled in from the Pacific, heavy and dark. The first drops of rain fell on a Tuesday afternoon. Zachary was in town and stood in the street with dozens of others, faces turned to the sky, letting the water hit them. People were laughing, crying, hugging strangers. It was just rain, something that should have been ordinary, but after 18 months of drought it felt like a miracle. The rain continued for 3 days, steady and soaking. The creek on the property began to flow again. The ground softened. The dust settled. By the time it stopped, the world looked different, washed clean. More rains came through November and December. The grass began to grow, tentative at first, then stronger. The sheep grazed on new growth and their coats thickened. The garden flourished. The entire county seemed to exhale with relief. Christmas came and Rosalind cooked a feast, or what passed for a feast given their budget. Roasted chicken, vegetables, pie made with dried apples. They invited Thomas and Martha Reynolds to join them, and the four of them ate and talked late into the evening. "You two are going to make it," Thomas said as he and Martha were leaving. "You have the right attitude." "Too many people give up at the first hardship." "We have had plenty of hardship," Zachary said. "We are just stubborn. Stubborn is good in this life." After they left, Zachary and Rosalind sat by the fire. The small house was warm and comfortable. Outside, a light rain fell, the sound soothing against the roof. "I have something to tell you," Rosalind said. There was something in her tone that made Zachary turn to her. "What is it?" "I am pregnant." He stared at her, not quite processing the words. "You are certain?" "I am 2 months along. I did not want to say anything until I was sure, but I am sure now, Rosalind." He did not have words. He pulled her close, holding her tight. "I thought it was not possible, so did I, but here we are." She pulled back to look at him. "Are you happy?" "Happy." "I am terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. Yes, I am happy." "Are you?" "Yes. I am scared too, but yes, I am happy." They held each other, two people who had lost so much being given something precious and unexpected. Outside, the rain continued, life-giving and steady, washing away the past and making way for new growth. The winter was mild and wet, making up for the long drought. The land recovered quickly. By February, the pastures were green and the sheep were thriving. Rosalind's pregnancy progressed without complication. She continued working the garden and managing the household, though Zachary took on more of the heavy labor as her belly grew. In March, the ewes began lambing. It was Zachary's first experience with it, and despite Thomas Reynolds' advice and help, it was challenging. Some ewes had difficulty and needed assistance. One lamb died despite their best efforts. But most births went smoothly, and by the end of the month they had 16 healthy lambs. "We are growing," Rosalind said, watching the lambs jump and play in the pasture. She was sitting on a chair Zachary had brought out for her, her hand resting on her rounded stomach. "In more ways than one," Zachary said, putting his hand over hers. They had discussed names endlessly. If it was a boy, they liked Zachariah after his father. If a girl, Rose after Rosalind's mother. But they would wait until the baby arrived to decide for certain. April brought warmer weather and continued growth. The flock was healthy and the wool was coming in thick. They would shear in May, their first harvest. The money from wool would help offset expenses and hopefully leave enough to expand the flock next year. Rosalind's time came in late April. Labor started in the evening, gentle contractions that grew steadily stronger. Zachary rode for the midwife, an experienced woman named Helen who had delivered half the babies in Petaluma. She arrived quickly and took charge with calm efficiency. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Zachary stayed close, holding Rosalind's hand when she wanted it, stepping back when she needed space. She was strong, focusing through the pain with gritted teeth and occasional curses that made even Helen raise her eyebrows. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, the baby came. A boy, red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way. Helen cleaned him and wrapped him and placed him in Rosalind's arms. "A son," Rosalind said, her voice full of wonder. She looked at Zachary with tears streaming down her face. "We have a son." Zachary could not speak. He just knelt beside the bed and put his arms around his wife and child, overcome with emotions too big for words. They named him Zachariah James, James for Rosalind's first husband, honoring the past while embracing the future. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Rosalind recovered quickly, back on her feet within days, though Zachary insisted she rest more. The house that had been big enough for 2 adults felt suddenly small with a baby, but they managed. They converted a corner of the bedroom into a nursery of sorts, with a cradle Zachary built and blankets Rosalind sewed. The baby's cries filled the house, along with his gurgles and eventually his laughter. In May, they sheared the sheep. Thomas Reynolds came to help, teaching Zachary the technique. It was skilled work, requiring patience and care to remove the wool without injuring the animal. They worked for 3 days and produced over 200 pounds of wool, which they sold to a buyer in San Francisco for a good price. The money was the best they had seen in over a year. After paying expenses, they had $60 left over. It was not a fortune, but it was profit. Their venture was working. That evening, Zachary and Rosalind sat on the porch with baby Zachariah sleeping in a basket between them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The land was green and alive. The sheep grazed peacefully. The air smelled of grass and possibility. "You remember what you said before we married?" Rosalind asked. "About scraping by together." "I do." "I was very romantic," she laughed. "You were practical, but I have been thinking about that. We are not scraping by anymore. We are not rich, but we are doing more than surviving. We are thriving." Zachary looked out at the land, at the flock they had built, at the woman beside him and the child between them. She was right. 18 months ago he had lost everything. His ranch, his livelihood, his future. He had been broken and hopeless. Now he had a family, a business, a purpose. He had rebuilt from nothing with the help of a woman who had seen in him something worth saving. "We are," he agreed. "We really are. I love you, Zachary Ingram." "I love you too, Rosalind Ingram." The baby stirred and Rosalind picked him up, holding him against her shoulder. Zachary put his arm around both of them. They sat like that as the stars came out, a family watching the day end and the night begin, secure in what they had built and confident in what would come. The summer of 1877 was bountiful. Regular rains kept the pastures green and the sheep healthy. Baby Zachariah grew quickly, hitting milestones that delighted his parents. He smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 2 months, and by 4 months was trying to roll over with determined grunts. The flock expanded. Several of the ewes who had not lambed in spring did so in fall, giving them 8 more lambs. They sold some of the young rams and kept the best for breeding. By winter, they had 30 adult sheep and were discussing whether to expand their leased acreage. "We could probably handle 50 sheep with the land we have," Zachary said, "but if we want to go bigger, we need more space." "Let us see how we do with 30 first," Rosalind said. "I do not want to overextend. You are the practical one. Someone has to be." They settled into family life with surprising ease, considering neither had children before. Zachary discovered he loved being a father, loved watching his son grow and change. Rosalind balanced motherhood with managing their small farm with impressive skill. They worked as partners in all things, making decisions together, dividing labor according to who was best suited for what. In November, Zachary rode into town for supplies and ran into Edmund Turnbull outside the bank. The banker smiled and shook his hand. "Mr. Ingram, good to see you. I hear your flock is doing well." "It is. We are pleased with how it is going. I am glad. You have proven the board right in taking a chance on you." Turnbull paused. "Actually, I have been meaning to speak with you. Do you have a moment?" They went into the bank and back to Turnbull's office. The banker pulled out a file and opened it. "The bank still owns your former property," he said. "The house and the immediate acreage around it, about 60 acres total. We have been unable to sell it. The truth is, we have too much real estate we cannot move. It is a burden on our books." "I am sorry to hear that." "Do not be. I have a proposition for you. The bank would be willing to sell you the property at a significant discount. You have been leasing 25 acres. We would sell you the full 60 acres, including the house and structures, for $800. Zachary was stunned. Before the drought, that property had been worth at least $3,000. That is very low. It is realistic. Empty property deteriorates. We would rather have it owned and maintained by someone who will use it. You have proven yourself reliable. The board approved this offer yesterday. I would need time to raise that much money. We could do a land contract. You put down $200 and pay $50 a year for 12 years. We would maintain the deed until it is paid off, but the property would be yours to use. It was an incredible opportunity. With 60 acres, they could expand significantly. The house could be repaired and used or rented out. They could build a real operation. I need to discuss this with my wife. Of course, take a week. Let me know. Zachary rode home with his mind spinning. He told Rosalind everything over dinner while baby Zachariah gummed a piece of bread in his high chair. $800, Rosalind said slowly. It is a lot of money. It is, but it is also an incredible deal. That property is worth much more. Do we have $200 for the down payment? We have about $160 saved. We could sell some sheep or wool to make up the difference. And then $50 a year. That is manageable, especially if we expand the flock. They talked late into the night, weighing options and risks. Finally, Rosalind said, I think we should do it. It is a risk, but a calculated one, and it would give us real security. Our own land, not leased. You are sure? I am sure. Are you? Zachary thought about the land, the ranch he had built and lost and could now reclaim in a different form. It was not the same as before. He was not the same. But maybe that was good. Maybe he was better now, stronger for having fallen and gotten back up. I am sure. The next week they went to the bank together and signed the papers. It took most of their savings for the down payment, leaving them little cushion, but it felt right. They walked out of the bank as landowners again. Over the winter they made plans. They would expand the flock to 50 sheep by next fall. They would repair the old ranch house slowly, a little at a time as money allowed. Eventually they might move into it, but for now Rosalind's smaller house was enough. They were in no hurry. Spring came and the cycle began again. Lambing, shearing, selling. They hired a young man named Peter to help with the heavy work, paying him partly in cash and partly in meals. He was a good worker, 19 years old and eager to learn. Baby Zachariah took his first steps in April, lurching between furniture with determined concentration. His first word was sheep, which delighted Zachary to no end. He was a happy child, easygoing and curious about everything. In May, Rosalind told Zachary she was pregnant again. Already, he said, though he was smiling. Apparently we are making up for lost time. I am not complaining. Neither am I. This pregnancy was harder than the first. Rosalind was more tired, more prone to sickness. But she pushed through. Continuing to work, though, Zachary took on more and more of her tasks. By the time summer arrived, she was moving slowly, her belly large and uncomfortable in the heat. Their second child, a daughter, was born in December during a rainstorm. The labor was faster than the first, only 6 hours. The baby came out wailing, a shock of dark hair already visible. They named her Rose Marie, Rose for Rosalind's mother and Marie for Sarah, Zachary's first wife. It felt right to honor both the women who had shaped their pasts. 2 children, Rosalind said, holding her daughter while Zachariah, now 20 months old, peered curiously at his new sister. We have a real family now. We have had a real family, Zachary said. Now we have a bigger one. Rose was a more demanding baby than her brother, crying often and sleeping poorly. Zachary and Rosalind took turns walking her at night, bleary-eyed and exhausted. But they managed, as they had managed everything else, with patience and teamwork and occasional frustration that they vented and then moved past. The flock continued to grow. By the spring of 1879 they had 60 sheep, pushing the limits of their current pasture. They discussed leasing more land from the bank, but decided instead to be more aggressive with rotating the flock to prevent overgrazing. The work was constant and demanding. Zachary was up before dawn most days, checking animals, mending fences, managing a dozen tasks. Rosalind juggled childcare with bookkeeping, cooking, and maintaining the household. Peter proved invaluable, taking on more responsibility as he learned. But despite the hard work, they were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way neither had thought possible a few years earlier. They had built something real together, something lasting. The drought and loss that had brought them together seemed like a different lifetime. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep, Zachary and Rosalind sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of busy days. "You ever think about how we got here?" Rosalind asked, "all the time. I lost my first husband. You lost your ranch and your first wife. We both lost so much." "Yes. But maybe we had to lose those things to find each other. Maybe, or maybe life is just random and we were lucky." "I will take lucky." Rosalind leaned against him. "I remember the first time you came to fix my fence. You looked so lost, so broken. I thought about turning you away because I did not want to deal with someone else's sadness on top of my own. What changed your mind? I saw how you looked at my garden, like it was a miracle, like you could not understand how anything could still be alive and growing. And I realized you needed hope more than I needed solitude. That garden saved my life." "No, you saved your own life. The garden was just the excuse to start." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken. Finally, Zachary said, "When I was in the bank about to lose everything, I thought my life was over. I was 32 and felt ancient. Now I am 35 and I feel young, younger than I did at 20. That is what love does. Real love, the kind built on shared work and mutual respect. It makes you feel possible again. Is that what you think we have? Real love?" She turned to look at him, her eyes serious. "Yes, absolutely yes. What we have is real in every way that matters. Good, because I would hate for all this to be built on false pretenses." He smiled to show he was joking. "You are terrible at romance, you know that? And yet you married me anyway. Moment of weakness. Lasted 4 years so far." "So far," she agreed and kissed him. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and joys. Zachariah grew into a bright, active boy who loved animals and wanted to help with everything. Rose was quieter, more thoughtful, content to observe before acting. They were different but close, the kind of siblings who argued constantly but defended each other fiercely against outsiders. In 1880, Rosalind became pregnant again. This time she insisted they were done after this one, that 3 children were plenty. Zachary agreed readily, watching how exhausted she was. Their third child, another boy, was born in early 1881. They named him Thomas Peter, after Thomas Reynolds, who had helped them so much, and Peter, who had become almost like family. With 3 young children, the household was chaos. Zachary and Rosalind existed in a state of constant motion, juggling childcare with farm work. Peter, now married to a local girl named Catherine, moved into the old ranch house with his bride and helped manage the expanded flock, which now numbered over 80 sheep. Money was still tight but steady. They were not wealthy, but they were secure, which felt like wealth after years of uncertainty. They paid down their land debt ahead of schedule. They made improvements to both houses. They bought a milk cow and chickens and expanded the garden. Little by little, they built comfort and stability. By 1883, Zachariah was 6 and starting school in town. Rose was 4 and already showing signs of being a skilled artist, drawing pictures of animals and people with surprising detail. Thomas was 2 and following his older siblings everywhere, demanding to be included in everything. One day in May, Zachary and Rosalind stood together on the ridge overlooking their property. The land was green and thriving. The sheep grazed peacefully across multiple pastures. Both houses stood solid and well maintained. In the distance, they could see their children playing near the garden while Peter's wife watched them. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is real," Rosalind said, "that we built all this from nothing. Not nothing, we had each other." "Yes, but that almost was not enough. If you had left town, if I had not offered you that fence work, if any of a dozen things had gone differently, none of this would exist. But they did not go differently. We are here. We made this." She took his hand. "I have never told you this, but I need to. When you came to me that first time, I saw you had lost everything. Your land, your money, your future. Everything. And I thought about what I could offer you, what I had that was worth anything. I did not have much. A little money, a garden, a small house, but I had something else." "What?" "A heart that still worked. A heart that could still love even after loss. And I realized that was what you needed most. Not money or land or even work. You needed to know that love was still possible, that you could still be valued for who you were rather than what you owned." Zachary felt his throat tighten. "You gave me that. You gave me everything. I remember telling myself, if this man will accept love as wealth, if he can understand that your heart is all the wealth I need, then maybe we both can survive. Maybe we can build something real. And you told me that. Not in words, not at first, but eventually, yes. Do you remember? It was after we were married, maybe a month in. We were sitting at the table looking at bills, trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. And you got frustrated and said something about being worthless as a husband because you brought nothing to the marriage." Zachary did remember. He had been angry at himself, feeling like a failure. "And I took your hand and said, 'You bring your heart, and your heart is all the wealth I need.' Do you remember that?" "I do. I thought you were just being kind. I was being honest. I meant every word. Your heart, your capacity to love and work and build, that was what mattered. The rest was just details. Those details felt pretty important at the time. They were important. But they were not everything. They were not even the most important thing." She squeezed his hand. "We built all this together, but we built it because we loved each other first. The love was the foundation. Everything else came from that." Zachary pulled her close. "I do not know what I did to deserve you. You kept going when everything told you to give up. That is what you did. And you let yourself be loved when you thought you had nothing to offer. That took courage." They stood together on the ridge, looking out over their small empire. In the distance, their children's laughter carried on the wind. The sheep moved slowly across the green pasture. The sun warmed their skin. "Your heart is all the wealth I need," Zachary repeated. "That is still true. This land, these animals, all of it matters, but you are what makes it matter. You and the children, you are the point of all of it. I know, same for me. We could lose everything again tomorrow and we would be all right because we have each other. Let us not lose everything again, though. Once was enough," she laughed. "Agreed. Once was definitely enough." They walked back down the ridge together, hand in hand, toward the house and the children and the work that never quite ended. But it was good work, meaningful work, and they did it together. The years rolled on with the steady rhythm of farm life. Seasons turned, children grew, the flock expanded and then stabilized at a manageable size. Zachary's hair started to gray at the temples. Rosalind's hands grew more calloused. They both moved a little slower in the mornings, feeling the accumulated weight of hard work in their joints. But they were happy. That fundamental truth underlay everything else. They had built a life that was rich in the ways that mattered: love, family, purpose, security. They had taken their losses and transformed them into something beautiful. By 1890, Zachariah was 16 and running much of the daily farm operations alongside Peter, who was now 40 and like an older brother to him. Rose was 14, still artistic but also showing a head for business, helping her mother with accounts. Thomas was 12, obsessed with horses and determined to become the best rider in the county. Zachary and Rosalind, now in their mid-40s, had settled into a comfortable partnership that felt as natural as breathing. They knew each other completely, all the good and bad, and loved each other more for the knowing. One evening that fall, their anniversary, they took a rare evening alone together. Peter and Catherine watched the children, and Zachary and Rosalind rode out to their favorite spot on the ridge as the sun set. 14 years, Rosalind said. It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. Both, Zachary agreed. When I think about who I was when we met, I barely recognize him. I recognize him. He is still in there, the determined man who would not give up even when everything was lost. But he is better now, happier. That is all. You made me better. We made each other better. That is how good marriages work. They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The land stretched out before them, their land, earned and kept through determination and love. I want to tell you something, Zachary said. I have been thinking about this for a while. What is it? When I lost the ranch the first time, I thought I had failed. Failed at being a husband to Sarah, failed at being a rancher, failed at life. I carried that for years, that sense of being a failure. You were not a failure. The drought was beyond your control. I know that intellectually, but feeling it is different. Anyway, what I want to say is that you showed me something. You showed me that failure is not permanent, that you can lose everything and still rebuild. That love is more valuable than land or money or any material thing. Zachary, let me finish. You said once that my heart was all the wealth you needed. I did not really understand that then. I thought you were just being poetic, trying to make me feel better. But now I understand. You were telling me that people are what matter, that who we are and how we love is the only wealth that really counts. Yes, exactly yes. So I want to say the same to you. Your heart is all the wealth I need. It was true 14 years ago when I had nothing. It is true now when we have something. It will be true for the rest of our lives, however long we get. Rosalind's eyes filled with tears. That is the most romantic thing you have ever said to me. Really, I thought I was just stating facts. She laughed and cried at the same time, and he held her as the stars came out above them. They stayed there for a long time, just being together, two people who had found each other in the hardest of times and built something lasting. When they finally rode back, the house was lit with lamplight, warm and welcoming. Their children were inside, safe and happy. The land around them was theirs, earned and treasured. They had come so far from that day in the drought when Zachary had lost everything and thought his life was over. He had lost everything. But in losing it, he had found something more valuable. He had found love, real and deep and transformative. He had found a partner who valued him for who he was rather than what he owned. He had found a life built on the only foundation that truly mattered: the human heart, and its capacity to endure and love and rebuild. They dismounted, and Zachary took care of the horses while Rosalind went inside. Through the window he could see her hugging their children, talking and laughing with them. This was wealth. This was everything. He finished with the horses and walked toward the house, toward his family, toward the life they had built together from nothing but love and determination. The night was clear and cool, stars bright overhead. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, and closer, a sheep bleated softly. Zachary Ingram, who had once lost everything, stepped into his house and closed the door behind him, grateful beyond words for the wealth he had found in the most unexpected place in the heart of a widow who had seen past his losses to the man he could become, who had loved him when he thought himself unlovable, who had shown him that the only wealth that truly matters is the wealth of the human heart. And in that small house in Petaluma, California, with his wife and children around him and the land secure beneath his feet, Zachary Ingram knew he was the richest man alive. The years continued their steady march. The children grew into young adults with their own dreams and plans. Zachariah took over full management of the farm, showing the same determination and work ethic his father had demonstrated. Rose married a teacher from town and moved to San Francisco, where she sold her artwork and lived a life full of beauty and culture. Thomas, true to his childhood obsession, became a horse trainer of some renown, traveling throughout California working with difficult animals. Zachary and Rosalind, now in their 50s, gradually stepped back from the daily work of the farm. They had raised their children well, built a successful operation, and earned their rest. They spent their days in gentle routine maintaining the garden, visiting grandchildren when they came, sitting on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. Peter and Catherine had children of their own, and their oldest son showed interest in eventually taking over the operation. The land would continue, passing to the next generation as it should. The cycle would go on. One day, in the spring of 1895, Zachary and Rosalind took a ride out to the ridge. They were both graying now, faces lined with years of sun and work, but still strong, still vital. They sat on the same rock where they had sat so many times before and looked out over the land. 20 years married, Rosalind said. Plus the few months before that when you were courting me, if you can call what you did courting. I fixed your fence very romantically. You did, the most romantic fence fixing I have ever experienced. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands. Finally, Zachary said, I have been thinking about that day at the bank. The day Turnbull told me I was losing the ranch. I wanted to die. Not literally, but close. I could not imagine a future worth living. I know. If someone had told me then that 20 years later I would be sitting here, happily married with 3 children and grandchildren on the way, with land of my own and a successful farm, I would not have believed them. I could not have imagined this. Life surprises us. It does. But it was not just life, Rosalind. It was you. You saw something in me worth saving when I did not see it myself. You gave me a reason to keep going. You taught me that wealth is not about what you own, but about who you love and who loves you back. You taught me the same. After James died, I thought I was done with love. I thought I would just live out my days alone, managing my garden and keeping to myself. I had resigned myself to that. What changed? You showed up at my door looking lost and desperate, and I saw an opportunity. Not to save you, but to save us both. I realized we could be lonely together, which would be better than being lonely alone. And then somewhere along the way, lonely together became happy together. Best decision I ever made, accepting that fence job. Best decision I ever made, offering it. They sat together as the sun moved across the sky. The land spread out before them, green and alive and theirs. Not just in the legal sense of ownership, but in the deeper sense of having earned it through work and love and refusal to give up. Your heart is all the wealth I need, Zachary said. That was true 20 years ago, and it is true now. Every good thing in my life came from loving you and being loved by you. The land, the children, all of it stems from that first decision to let myself be loved when I thought I had nothing to offer. You had everything to offer. You just did not see it. I see it now. Took me a while, but I see it. Rosalind leaned against him, and they watched the day slowly turn toward evening. They had earned this peace, this contentment. They had survived loss and drought and uncertainty. They had built something lasting not because they were lucky or special, but because they had chosen each other and kept choosing each other every day for 20 years. That was the real wealth, the daily choosing, the constant recommitment, the work of loving someone through good times and hard times and everything in between. As the sun touched the horizon, they stood and walked back to their horses. The ride home was slow and easy. Two people who knew every inch of this land because they had walked it and worked it and loved it. They reached the house as darkness fell. Inside, Catherine had left dinner warming on the stove. The house smelled of bread and stew. They ate together at their kitchen table, the same table where they had sat so many times before, planning and worrying and hoping. After dinner, they sat on the porch, their evening ritual. The stars came out, bright and clear. Somewhere in the darkness, sheep moved in the pasture. A cool breeze carried the scent of grass and earth. "I love you, Zachary Ingram," Rosalind said. "I love you, Rosalind Ingram," he replied. They sat together in the darkness. Two people who had found each other when they both needed finding, who had built a life together from nothing but love and determination, and refusal to surrender to despair. They had taken their losses and transformed them into something beautiful and lasting. The drought had taken everything from Zachary Ingram. But in taking everything, it had given him the opportunity to discover what really mattered. And a widow named Rosalind Burke had shown him the truth that would define the rest of his life, that your heart is all the wealth I need. That truth had saved him. It had saved them both. And it had built a legacy that would outlast them, that would continue in their children and their children's children. A legacy not of land or money, but of love, endurance, and the unshakable belief that people are what matter, that hearts are where true wealth resides. As they sat together under the stars, Zachary and Rosalind knew they were wealthy beyond measure. Not because of what they owned, but because of what they had given each other: love, partnership, purpose, and the profound gift of being truly known and still truly loved. They stayed on the porch until late, talking and laughing and reminiscing. Eventually they went inside and climbed into bed, curling together as they had for 20 years. Outside, the land they had fought for lay quiet in the darkness, waiting for the dawn when the work would begin again. But for now, there was just this: two hearts beating in rhythm, two lives intertwined so completely that neither could imagine existing without the other. They fell asleep together, grateful for every moment that had brought them to this place, grateful for the losses that had taught them what truly mattered, grateful for the love that had proven to be the only wealth they ever really needed.